Welcome in, everybody, to the 6th episode of the Free Play Podcast. We're flying solo today, but it should still be a good episode regardless. We got a lot to talk about with the NCAA transfer portal officially closing, but still some recruitments still ending, some more commits trickling in for a lot of programs across the country. We have a national championship to recap between Indiana and Miami, which was honestly a better game than I thought it was going to be. So we'll get into that. And just overall some top pieces that I liked added in the transfer portal by the two in-state schools, KU and K-State. And we'll go over transfer portal rankings and why you should be wary of transfer portal rankings because sometimes they're not the most accurate. And we'll get into that. But first, kicking it off with the national championship, we have Indiana and Miami. This was a game that I thought Miami was not going to have a chance in. I thought there was a decent chance that Indiana could blow them out just based on the offensive performance I thought they were going to put up. I did not think that Miami's offense could hold a candle to Indiana's defense with some of the guys they have on that side of the ball, but Indiana didn't have the best defensive performance in this one. They gave up 21 points, which you're saying that's not that much, but for Indiana's defense it is. They've held teams low scoring all season long, and to me it was kind of a surprise that they let players such as Malachi Toney and Mark Fletcher just kind of ruin their day defensively. And that was despite Carson Beck having a generationally awful performance on the offensive side of the ball. They were really carried by Malachi Toney and Mark Fletcher. That's the only reason why Carson Beck's stat line looks good from this game somewhat. Indiana's defense, as I mentioned, did not hold up as well as I thought it was going to. They let their day get ruined by Malachi Toney and Mark Fletcher, and no doubt those are two insanely talented players, especially with Malachi Toney only being a freshman. Who knows where he even gets drafted in a couple years with how well he's produced this year for Miami. But I thought the players that Indiana has along their defensive line and in the secondary were going to create mismatches. And I know Miami has an incredible offensive line, but Indiana's just been such a juggernaut and have made it a really difficult day for quarterbacks such as Julian Sayin at Ohio State just because of how pressure-filled their defense is. Like, their defensive line does an incredible job of getting upfield and putting pressure on the quarterback and making him escape. So I thought that was a bit of a weak point in Carson Beck's game is when he gets throwing on the run. Sometimes he can be inaccurate and leads to the interceptions. So I thought this would be a great matchup for the Indiana defense. But it seems like the Miami offense just ran through Mark Fletcher Jr. and Malachi Toney and just led them to stay in this game for as long as they did. But the real turning point of the game was the blocked punt, I believe was in the third quarter. By Indiana, because if we take that score off the board, Miami actually wins this game. Now, Miami did answer back with a touchdown right after the block punt TD, but not even giving Miami's defense the opportunity to stop Indiana's offense on that drive is a bit unfortunate for Miami because of how good their defense is and how many times they answered the bell, even not only in the season but this game. They had some big stops early. They couldn't quite get the stop down the stretch, but Curt Cignetti, I mean, he's the basically reason why Indiana has been in this position. He has done an incredible job as soon as he got to Indiana, and he's the one that is coming up with these ways to prevent these teams like Miami's defense from causing problems with Indiana's offense. So Curt Cignetti has just transformed Indiana in more ways that you can even imagine. 27-2 under Curt Cignetti, and has turned Indiana into one of the best programs in all of college football. I would assume that they would be one of the top 3 to 5 candidates to win the college football playoff again next year. We know they kind of got embarrassed his first year in the college football playoff, but they had a much better roster this season, and I don't think they're going away anytime soon. They've had an incredible portal class this season. They've taken 2 players from Kansas State to beef up the defensive line even further. They've added another quarterback from the Big 12, and Josh Hoover and they just continue to cycle in these quarterbacks and have them produce great seasons. We saw it with Mendoza. Curtis Rourke, his first year transferring up from, I believe, Ohio in the MAC, I want to say. So we've seen Curt Cignetti just piece together year after year with these almost one-year mercenaries, and he just takes a lot of older college players. So that experience is really important for Curt Cignetti, and he reloaded with a lot more of it, not only this season but in the transfer portal. So I think Indiana is going to be right back in the mix again next year. So if you think this is a flash in the pan from Indiana and having teams like this compete for the national championship, it's not. Texas Tech is only getting better. Indiana's only getting better. These teams with the big money and these big money programs are only getting better because the recruiting classes keep getting better. The talent pool that they can have for coaching gets better because they can spend more on assistant salaries. So I think that's really the big thing is these programs like Indiana are not going to be going away because they have boosters that are behind them. Indiana has one of the largest alumni bases in all of America, and also having a very wealthy booster behind them in Mark Cuban. And, of course, we know Texas Tech with Cody Campbell, Patrick Mahomes, pumping that program full of money and bringing them top recruits in the high school class, which Indiana more so loves to do in the portal, bringing that experience in that Cignetti values. So I don't think Indiana is a program that will be going away. Curt Cignetti is losing a lot of players that he did have at James Madison, but like D'Angelo Pons and some others that were incredible for him down this playoff run. But I believe that the way they reloaded in the portal will allow them to continue to have success, and we'll have to see, but it kind of leads me to believe they will have even more success with how well Cignetti can kind of get people ingrained in his system and then push them to succeed in that season. Fernando Mendoza had an incredible performance in this game as well. To me, it was kind of a weaker Heisman season, so not having his Heisman moment yet was really one thing that kind of stuck out in my mind is like, all right, this guy's kind of like, he's just meh in terms of overall Heisman winners for the last even decade, certainly all time, but that 4th and 5 touchdown run from Fernando Mendoza was the stuff that is in movies. Like the way he just puts the team on his back in the most critical moments of the game and has delivered for Indiana in the most important situations, taking that brutal blow in the Big Ten championship game and getting right back up and staying in the game and leading Indiana to win that game. His toughness is what really sets him apart, I think, from the rest of the competition in terms of his physical traits may not be there, which is why I don't know if he's going to succeed in the NFL at a much higher level than what we've seen out of quarterbacks like him in the past, but just his toughness, his perseverance, his leadership ability is what I believe is ultimately getting him drafted first overall, which is kind of what I wanted to move into next. Of Fernando Mendoza was a great college quarterback, and I think the Raiders do have enough evidence that they should draft him with the first pick in the NFL draft, but I don't know that he has the certain physical qualities and attributes that we've seen out of the most successful rookie quarterbacks or second-year quarterbacks the last couple of years to really warrant him being drafted that high based on what we've seen out of previous quarterbacks. Going through the list of some players that have not succeeded after being drafted somewhat high in the draft, we've seen it this year. Dillon Gabriel, he wasn't drafted as high as Mendoza will be, obviously, but Dillon Gabriel, his best attribute in terms of a physical sense was his accuracy, which is, I think, probably true for Mendoza as well. So that's something that didn't really contribute all that greatly at the NFL level for Gabriel. The defenses are just so much faster. They can close much faster. The processing speed, it has to be off the charts for quarterbacks in the NFL level. And I'm not sure Mendoza really has that ability right now to diagnose what exactly is happening pre-snap. Maybe this is an awful take. Maybe this will age like milk. Maybe I'll be on freezing cold takes in a couple of years. I have no idea. But something just gives me the hunch that he doesn't have the type of physical skills that are required to carry himself early on in his career through the lumps. We've seen it happen with a lot of young quarterbacks like Jordan Love, relying on his arm strength and big playability. We've seen it out of quarterbacks like Jalen Hurts that rely on their mobility earlier in their career until they get comfortable passing in the pocket. We've seen Cam Ward have a little bit of success, but I feel strongly that he will have a good NFL future because of his overall improvisational skills. And a guy that was highly criticized coming in the draft this year was Jackson Dart, and we saw how good of a rookie season he put together, and really carried by his mobility and deep ball accuracy was what the book was coming out on him in the draft. And people didn't think that stuff was going to translate, and it did. So it's all coming down to physical attributes for me, and Mendoza is a good enough athlete at the college level. We've seen him make big plays like his 4th and 5 touchdown run, and he's certainly not afraid to take some shots and get a first down when needed. But at the NFL level, I question whether his athleticism will be enough to carry him, maybe especially going to the Vegas Raiders. I mean, their offensive line is abysmal, and he's going to have to be running for his life a lot, and I'm not sure he has the exact same mobility skills as a player like Jackson Dart or Cam Ward that will allow him to evade pressure from the opposing defenses against how bad of an offensive line he will be thrust into. So we'll see how Mendoza will do at the NFL level. This is something that we're going to have to just watch over his rookie year. I think the rookie year is a big fundamental development year. It really shows what type of player they can be in the NFL. We've hardly ever seen a quarterback just go from being trash in the rookie year to being one of the better ones in the league. Typically, we've seen some type of promise and some type of flash. So it'll basically come down to Mendoza's rookie year for me. If I can see some physical traits start to pop out from his game, I will be more confident. But until the Raiders really assemble any type of weapon group around Mendoza or an offensive line, really, I don't see the Raiders having that much success with him. So I have no questions of him as a leader. I think he's a phenomenal leader. I think he really is willing to do whatever it takes to help his team win. He's a winner through and through, 16-0 to the national championship. So we'll just have to wait and see. The Raiders are almost guaranteed going to take him 1-1, especially with Dante Moore going back to Oregon. So I don't think the situation would have been any better if Dante Moore would have been in the draft, because we're talking about either Mendoza or Moore going to the Jets, which is equally of bad as a situation. So Indiana will have some intriguing players in this draft, though. D'Angelo Pons would probably be a top 5 pick, in my opinion, if he was not 5'9". If he was 5'11", we're probably seeing D'Angelo Pons drafted maybe, like I said, in the top 5, first round easily. And they have obviously an incredible defensive line, an incredible offensive line. They really won in the trenches this year. Some very talented receivers that I don't know will run the fastest in the combine, which might push them down the board, but we know Elijah Surratt, we know Omar Cooper Jr., and we know Becker from Indiana are studs. So I have no doubt that they will be able to carve out some type of role in the NFL, but we'll just have to see how high they get drafted, really, because oftentimes in the NFL, it's not where you get drafted, it's how high you get drafted. Sometimes will determine the amount of opportunity you get. So if some of those players slip into the back rounds of the draft, which is easy to happen for receivers if they don't run a good 40-yard dash time, we'll just have to see what type of situation they get put in and if they will actually be given a shot. On the Miami side of the ball, they had an incredible season, and I don't think it should take away anything that Mario Cristobal did in this game. The overall season they had was a little bit lackluster. Losing to Notre Dame could have ended up coming back to bite them in terms of missing the playoff, and missing the ACC championship was certainly a rough point in their season, but the way that they rebounded and leaned on this incredible defense down the stretch, which has so many talented players that will get drafted, namely Ruben Bain. I think this guy is going to be an incredible defensive lineman in the NFL, which is not that hot of a take. He's almost guaranteed to be drafted inside the top 10. Does have some arm length concerns, but I'm not sure that that's enough to really drop him outside of the top 10. For me, he's probably a top 5 pick. So Carson Beck, I think, got put in the best situation possible he's been in his career. And he basically did the same exact thing he did at Georgia, which is just come up short. Like, I don't see Carson Beck having that meaningful of an NFL career. He might end up as a backup. He might get an opportunity to start one off on a season for a bad team like we've seen with Will Levis, but I'm not sure that we've really seen anything in his 6 years of college to really warrant him being someone that is worthy of being drafted in the first round, let alone given an opportunity to start meaningful NFL games for a team. But teams are desperate for quarterbacks, and they might latch on to what they've seen somewhat in the college football playoff, and being a part of some successful programs that took teams far and deep into the playoffs is certainly important, but teams will be focused on Malachi Toney for sure coming up in the 2028 draft. So that'll be interesting to see where he goes. He's a bit of a smaller guy. I would assume he'll run well, but in the off chance he doesn't, might be a bit of a tough sell for some teams, but he reminds me a lot of Steve Smith Sr. is kind of the player comp that I would give him. Malachi Toney just goes up and gets it whenever you need. And a certified game wrecker along with Mark Fletcher Jr., which we'll see what he ends up doing. I believe he's coming back to Miami next year. So at least they will be returning some very quality players. They do lose some offensive and more defensive line help into the draft. Francis Mauiaga is entering the draft, an offensive lineman. He's a candidate to be drafted very high in the draft. Mauled guys all season long at Miami. Very massive human. So he could be a fit for a team that needs some offensive line help, certainly. But Miami, I think, will be back. We'll see what they end up doing at quarterback. Darian Mensah is a weird situation from Duke. He enters the portal, but Duke says he's obligated to return under the contract he is in with Duke. So we'll see who ends up starting at QB next year for Miami, but the options are extremely limited. So we'll just have to see how they end up shaping the roster back in the transfer portal, because every other team in America has had the opportunity to do it except for Indiana and Miami, and even to an extent Indiana did it. Indiana loaded up a very, very good portal class despite still playing, and Miami really didn't do any portal work. So going through the transfer portal rankings for Kansas State and Kansas, On3 is the website that I decided to use. I think it is the better of the two recruiting websites, but their transfer portal rankings to me are not the best, and this is why. They factor in the players that you lost into your overall net transfer portal ranking. So for a program like K-State, their net transfer portal ranking score is extremely low because they brought in a new coach and they lost significant talent that was probably going to be departed regardless, but they had virtually no chance of retaining some of these players because of the coaches that were leaving. So we lost players like Austin Romaine, Jace Brown, Toby Osensami, Chidi Obiizer, just to name a few. And that tanks your ranking. When those guys go to big programs like Texas Tech, LSU, Indiana, it derails your transfer portal ranking in On3's system. So the rankings have Kansas State at 69 and KU at 53. Another note about transfer portal rankings is that many players that are outside the top 100, they simply don't have enough time to go and fully scout and get the idea of where they should rank in the portal rankings. So inside the top 100, you can trust it. It's pretty good. The players have a lot of film out there, and you can really tell what type of player they are and see how different they are compared to other players across the portal. But any player that's really outside the top 100, they're not focusing that much time to go through and analyze the film of, and we're not placing the number 576th guy with the number 577th and determining, oh, well, this guy's slightly better at this compared to this guy, so he's going to be one spot higher, when in the grand scheme of things, they're going to go to some mid-major or low P4 program like a Kansas or Kansas State. So overall, I thought these two teams did exactly what they probably needed to do in the portal. Some better. I think Kansas State's class is better than KU's despite the ranking, but might be a little homerism. But I really liked what K-State did in the portal this year. My top three that I think will have the most impact for them out of the portal will be Wendell Gregory the edge rusher from Oklahoma State. Had 4 sacks last year. 3 of them were against UT Martin, so not the most impressive. But what gets me really excited here is the amount of eligibility he has left. He was just a redshirt freshman this year, started his career at South Carolina, redshirted, transferred to Oklahoma State, played on an abysmal defense with no other help, and really turned in a good season. 4 sacks, as I mentioned, was one of the top pressure leaders in the entire Big 12, and I think he will command a lot of attention for this Kansas State defense. And I'm really excited to see how this defensive staff uses him. I think he's a good run defender, and that's not his calling card. I believe it is rushing the passer. So we'll see how he can improve on those 4 sacks from last year, but it certainly helps when you bring in a guy with pass rush production, such as Elijah Hill from Kennesaw State, another edge rusher. You're like, Kennesaw State, that's a former FCS program, isn't it? They were like 1-11 2 years ago. Kennesaw State was really darn good this year, and Elijah Hill was a big part of it. 9 sacks as a true freshman at Kennesaw State. This was an interesting recruitment. He enters the portal near the end of it with a do not contact tag, and less than, 18 hours later, he was committed to the Kansas State Wildcats. So I think there's work to do for him in the run game. He's a smaller guy, but I'm not concerned about it. He was just a true freshman, so we'll see how his technique can improve with some better coaches for sure, and putting on some extra weight. I believe he is in the 220s right now, maybe 230s. So once they get him up into the 240s, I feel very confident that he will be a good run defender, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. But the juice and twitch he brings off the edge as a pass rusher, he's got great bend to him, which is what I noticed, and I think he's going to create some havoc. And my main concern when they brought in Wendell Gregory was the ability for opposing offenses to just double him and chip him and harass him and make his day miserable, like many defenses in the NFL do with a lot of the top edge rushers. But bringing in a almost designated pass rusher like Elijah Hill, who may not be playing on rundowns as early in his career at Kansas State, it changes the landscape drastically for K-State, because that's fine. You can double, you can chip, you can send whatever you want at Wendell Gregory's way. But when there's a guy with as much bend, juice, twitch off the edge as Elijah Hill, there's no escaping it. Someone's going to be left one-on-one, and somebody will probably be beaten by these guys at some point during the game. The last player that I wanted to highlight out of Kansas State's transfer portal haul is Jason Prevard, a cornerback from Virginia. And Quay Moss was a player that hurt to lose in the transfer portal for Kansas State. Quay Moss transferred up from, I believe, a FCS program and played phenomenal in the nickel for Kansas State this season. And I think adding in Jason Prevard to replace the production that Quay Moss left when he left for Tennessee is a big addition to this defense. The nickel role is one of the most underrated, in my opinion, because when you are sending a blitz or dialing up a pressure package that you know will get home, oftentimes the hot route or the hot throw will be to the slot man. And having a good slot can really change the dynamic of a defense. NFL defenses are just starting to come around to it, paying slots more than a traditional corner. But Jason Prevard was a straight baller at Virginia. And if you are tuned into college football at all this season, you would know that Virginia was a pretty good team, which is typically something that is not commonly said about Virginia football. But they were incredible this season, I believe finishing ranked in the top 25, which is certainly a big deal for that Virginia program. And I think he will bring some very needed experience to the secondary. We saw them struggle at times with some youth back there and Zayshawn Rich and Donovan McIntosh, but adding in a player with all Big 12 potential like Jason Prevard is huge. And he was an all-ACC honorable mention this season at Virginia. To me, I don't think that's fair assessment. I thought he was much better than that. He had some great moments for him throughout the season, was one of the better cornerbacks in terms of passer rating allowed in the entirety of college football this season. Teams were just not throwing his way by the end of the year because of how good he was. My player comp for Jason Pavard, maybe not as much a player comp, but just the idea of what to think of when you see Jason Pavard suit up for Kansas State, is Julius Brents. Julius Brents was a guy who transferred in from Iowa and stayed at K-State for 2 years. I believe Pavard only has 1 year left, but Julius Brents leveraged his way at Kansas State into being drafted in the second round, and I think while their builds are not exactly the same, Pavard is a little bit smaller than Brents. Brents was an anomaly, a freak in terms of size at the corner position. I believe that he will have a similar impact to Julius Brents in terms of being maybe a cornerback one and really creating a difference on the defense and coming up with some clutch plays. If you are plugged into college football as much as some of us are, you would know that one of the biggest upsets of the season at the time was Florida State being beaten by Virginia. And you may remember a certain play at the end of the game, I believe in overtime, where Tommy Castellanos from Florida State rolled out, threw a ball into the end zone, and someone came up with an interception. The field was stormed. It was one of the most chaotic plays in college football of the season. Elite field storming. The cornerback that picked off that ball was Jason Pavard. And he had a phenomenal game that day. And I think that's the type of energy and the big playability he will bring to this Kansas State defense. Going into the transfer portal additions for KU, I think my three favorite are probably a controversial one to start off, but I do think this player has insane talent that he can tap into, and that is none other than the Derby product, Dylan Edwards, running back coming from Kansas State, Colorado, technically Notre Dame, K-State before that. He's been all over the place, but he is an electric, dynamic returner, running back, slot receiver if you want to play him there. But it all comes down to, can he control himself off the field or around benches, as we learned this season at Kansas State. If he can apply himself and be fully present for KU football this season, I think he has the opportunity to be one of the most dynamic players that we've ever seen in a Kansas football jersey. And it's something that I wouldn't say as a K-State fan I'm scared of, because we've seen time and time again Dylan not be able to focus himself on and off the field. But if he does figure out that aspect together of his game, this can be a very talented addition for a Kansas offense and someone that can pretty much flip their ability on its head. So I like this addition. I think if you're KU, this is an addition you should probably make. Raise the ceiling of your team a little bit higher and try to replace some run game that you lost when you lost Devin Neal and LaShawn Williams this season. So further into the transfer portal additions for Kansas, I like Connor Stroh, I believe is how you pronounce it. He's an offensive lineman coming from Texas. He's a big man, 6'5", I believe, 320, 330. So he has in-game experience at Texas, which I believe is big for this Kansas offensive line. I think he's immediate plug-and-play. I think he will be able to produce for the Kansas offense and maybe create some running lanes for Dylan Edwards. Who knows? But I think that is a good addition for the Kansas offensive line. Bringing in players like that I'm always a fan of, because it just feels like they're so reliable and rock solid, and like you know what you're going to get. And building a good interior offensive line is really underrated, because let's just be real, the fastest path to the quarterback is right over the center or right over the guards. So not even having a good interior offensive line is really not giving your chance a chance to succeed against high-level defenses. And then lastly, Nick McMillan, coming from Buffalo, a wide receiver, had 981 yards and 3 touchdowns for Lance Leipold's former university in 2025, Buffalo. He will, I would assume, be the wide receiver one almost surely for Kansas this season, and I think he's going to go a long way in terms of replacing the production that was left by Emmanuel Henderson. He was a good shot. KU likes to do this thing where they take shots on former high-level recruits or players in the SEC, which is not a bad strategy, but they're almost all lottery tickets, and K-State was in on Henderson the last transfer portal cycle. They'd ended up not getting him. He goes to KU, and he had a good season. He used his electric speed to create deep throws for Jalen Daniels that he somehow hit. I have no idea, but Emmanuel Henderson was a fantastic receiver for KU and someone that did cause problems for a lot of defenses, including K-State. It was a bit of a pain to play against him last year, and I think Nick McMillan, I don't know if he's the same type of burner that Emmanuel Henderson is, but certainly the production, 981 yards and 3 touchdowns, is certainly great, and the fact that KU was able to pull that in the portal was very good for them. So I think whoever they end up deciding to put in at quarterback, whether it is Isaiah Marshall or another guy they got in the portal this season, I think having a player like Nick McMillan is a good security and safety blanket for the new quarterback at Kansas University. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of the Free Play Podcast. Let us know in the comments if you have a specific transfer portal edition from your favorite team, and let us know what you thought about the national championship. I thought it was a great game. I kind of fell asleep a little bit in the first half because the game was not that good, but I was certainly awake for the second half and did not doze off one time. So thank you guys for listening. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next episode.